Good morning. Welcome to the annual July 2nd meeting of all the people at Northwest Bible Church who do not own a home in Colorado. That's who's left. And for all of you in Colorado watching right now, we're here. We know you have gone to prepare a place for us, and you will come back, and you will gather us to you. But I don't want to jump ahead. My name is Brian Summerall. My wife, Michelle, and I lead the Mad About You class. Actually, it's called Mad About and Sometimes At You class for marrieds. It was young marrieds, but this semester coming up in the fall, we take a break for the summer. We're opening that up to just all marrieds in general. If you're looking for a place to plug in, maybe you're not in a small group right now or community group and just kind of need a place to land to create community and meet people and laugh, have some fun, break some bread together and open some scripture and apply it to our marriages, we'd love to see you in the fall at the Mad About You class. But a little bit about me. The year was 1972. Richard Nixon was president for a few more days. The Cowboys were Super Bowl champions, Super Bowl VI. They beat Bob Greasy and the Miami Dolphins 24-3, and that was such a long time ago. The songs American Pie and Brandy, You're a Fine Girl, What a Good Wife You Would Be. Can anybody finish that? But my life, my love, and the lady is the sea. What a song. We're climbing the charts. I was 7, about to turn 8. The Summerall first family vacation was about to take place outside the state of Texas. We were going to venture beyond Texas's borders. We'd been to the Alamo. We'd been to Galveston, but we were going to venture out to Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. I was 8 years old. My sisters, my 2 older sisters were going, my parents, and you have to choose, how are we going to get there? What's the way? What's the route? Well, the way for us was the 1972 Chevy Caprice Estate station wagon. As you can see, it is as long as an aircraft carrier. If you stayed parked too long, planes would try to land on your hood. The back of it is where my sister Sharon and I, we were 14 months apart. We would lay in the back. All the luggage was up top. We would lay in the back, and my sister Vicky would have the middle seat because she was the oldest. And every now and then, if you were nice to her, she would let us climb over the wall and come visit her for a short time and then send us back to the back again, where Sharon and I had a vinyl pad that my parents laid out, and from the heat, you would just stick to it. As you fell asleep, your cheek would come enmeshed with the vinyl and a small puddle of drool, and you could barely get up. The back of that thing was like a terrarium in the southern heat in July. The moisture would gather up on the top, and every hour it would just rain in the back. We're growing plants and things back there. My dad was not stopping for anything. There were no McDonald's stops. There were, of course, no Chick-fil-A's back in 1972. So my mom had a cooler between the two of them in the front seat, the big red Igloo cooler. And she would pull out, turkey and meats and everything for sandwiches. And she would have literally cutlery up there, sharpening knives and slicing ham and doing things. And there were no seat belts back then. We didn't use seat belts. Now just to go to Target, it's like you're going to the moon. You lock your kids in with so many straps and harnesses. We did not have that then. We were one hitting of the brake away from being impaled on my mom's knives in the front seat. It was dangerous going on vacation in 1972. But my dad, you had to make a plan. And so for 2 weeks out, we would get the Rand McNally Road Atlas out. And we would lay it on the ground, and Dad, we would map our route of how we were going to get there. I don't have a road atlas today, but I do have my dad's old Mapsico. Remember the Mapsico? Did anybody ever have these in the back of your car? It was like an algebra problem to try and get anywhere. It's like, okay, I got 47A, and then I move up. That continues on map 7Q. Oh, I missed the Mapsico. But you had to plan the route. This wouldn't get you to South Carolina. It'd get you to the outskirts of Dallas. But we planned our route, and Dad prepared this incredible place for us. I mean, my memories of South Carolina are magical, even to the point that it's 51 years later. and my sisters and I and our kids and our neighbors that we lived next door to for a year and a half in Northwood Hills when I was 8. We lived next door to them only for a year and a half. We have gone there they live in New York now, to meet them every summer for 51 summers. It was our 51st summer this summer together with my sisters and our kids. My dad and mom have since passed, but we continue it. And our trip has grown, as you can see from this next picture. That's just some of us. We were 32 last year. We went from a 2-bedroom condo. As the family has grown, we've had to add rooms. And we're up to 3 houses and a couple of villas now. But those Hilton Head trips are just magical. This place that my dad created that continues long after he is gone. Well, what does that have to do with our scripture today? We are in John chapter 14. Jesus and his friends are in the upper room, and the disciples are in the upper room, and they're having kind of what's called the Last Supper. Things are looking kind of grim and dark, and the disciples are confused and panicked. So Jesus leads in verse 1, the first half of verse 1, if you want to open there in chapter 14 of John. Do not let your heart be troubled. Don't let your heart be troubled. Why would their heart be troubled? Why is he sensing their heart is troubled? Well, things are not what they expected. This is not the way they thought this whole thing would go. Jesus just told them just a bit earlier that he was going to die. He was going to be killed. That was not their plan. He just told Judas, who was about to betray him, go do what you're going to do and do it quickly. And Judas leaves to go sell him out. He looks at Peter and says, you will deny me 3 times before this night is over. Jesus had just gotten down on his knees and washed all the disciples' feet. Lord, this is not what you're supposed to do. This is not what a king does. This is not our expectation. And now he's saying, oh, and by the way, I'm leaving. Everything suddenly is going wrong. Michelle, my wife, and I watched a rom-com comedy last night, and 20 minutes before one of those things ends, I didn't want to watch that part because, you know, in those movies, 20 minutes before it ends, everything goes wrong. There's some big misunderstanding, and somebody mishears something, and everything goes wrong, and then the rest of the movie is the mad scramble to see if these two are actually going to get together. And what is somebody going to do to fix this? Well, this is the part where everything is going wrong. How are we going to fix this? But Jesus is confident. Do not let your hearts be troubled. This is not the end of the story, he knows. This is not the end of the story he is writing. And if you hear one thing today, maybe this is the one thing you need to hear. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Because your present circumstances, whatever they may be, whatever has gone wrong, no matter how dark it may seem, that is not the end of the story. Where is your heart troubled today? What is not going as you expected? Where do you most need to hear Jesus say, it's okay? Maybe you've been betrayed by a close friend or family member like Jesus is about to be. Maybe you've lost a job recently. Maybe you're paralyzed by financial fear and panicked about the future. Maybe a health situation has come into you or your family that was unexpected. Or maybe your family has a prodigal who has gone off and you are worried about. And you're thinking, are they ever going to come back? Well, Jesus says to us, whatever your current circumstances, he says, do not let your hearts be troubled. This is not the end. The full story has not been written yet. God is the one who writes the story. This is not the end. And maybe you needed to hear that this morning about some circumstance in your life. God's story is not fully written yet. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Jesus continues, you believe in God, believe also in me. And my Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? Hey, I'm going, and my Father's house has many rooms, and I'm going to prepare a place for you. I'm going ahead of you to prepare a place. Which leads us to point 1. If you're following along in your program, do not let your heart be troubled because Jesus prepares a place for you. The story is not fully written. It was a Jewish custom when a man and a woman were betrothed together to get married. There's engagement, kind of what we know, we're going to get married. Betrothal was a big deal ceremony. No, it's a contract. You're getting married. And so they would be betrothed together, and the woman and the man would separate for up to even a year. The woman would go back to her home, and the man would go back to his home, and then he would build on to his father's house, a place for his new family. And this could take a while. And the bride didn't know when he was coming back, so she lived expectantly, waiting for his return. But the groom could not come back until the father said, okay, it's ready. You may go and gather your bride. So Jesus is speaking in terms that they can understand. And as the family grew, the number of rooms on the house, this multi-generational house, grew. Just like our Hilton Head trips grew. We got 4 generations going now, starting with those 3 skinny kids back in 1972. We had to add rooms on as the family grew. Jesus is preparing a place for us because he loves us. We have entered a new covenant with him, and he goes to prepare a place so we can join him. And he is eager to return to collect his bride when the Father says it is time. He was not abandoning them. He was heading out to get our and their eternal home ready. So when your time comes, it's another reminder that that's not the end of the story. Heaven is being prepared for you. God writes the end of the story. Love prepares a welcome. Jesus prepares a place for his people because he loves them and he is confident of our arrival. Love prepares a welcome just like a mom prepares a new room for a new baby. Just like a host prepares a guest room for an expected, honored guest. And you can't wait for their arrival. That is what Jesus is talking about, preparing that place for us. Ken Geyer, one of my favorite authors, describes it like this. Imagine what it will be like living there. No bills, no cares, no fear of losing your job or your health. No worry about taxes or wondering about retirement. No anxiety about where the children are or whether they're safe or not. No fear of crime or war. No pollution, no corruption, no death, no disease, no sorrow, no tears. Nothing to be afraid of and everything to look forward to. Who would long for a home like that? No heat index. Take that, Pete Delkus. That's what I'm looking most forward to right now. Paul describes it in 1 Corinthians 2:19 as this: what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, and what no human mind has conceived. The things God has prepared for those who love him. You can't even imagine, Paul says, what it's going to be like. I mean, this is way much more than a Chip and JoJo fixer-upper reveal. You know, at the end of Fixer Upper, and the people have been away from the home, and they've been working on this place for them, and then they put up a big picture that covers the home of what it used to look like. And it's split down the middle so you can open it up like a curtain. And Chip and JoJo are on either side of it, and they're like, are you ready to see your fixer-upper? And then they start to back up, and then they cut to the couple, and they always go, and then a commercial. And then they cut back, Well, it's almost like what God is doing here. He is going to prepare that place. We are away for it right now. But we live in the ultimate fixer-upper at the moment. This world is not as it was intended to be, and I picture one day this reveal of St. Peter on one side and an angel on the other going, "Are you ready to see your fixer-upper?" And it's a picture of our current earth, and then they pull back, and there is a gasp. And there is no cut to commercial. There is a cut to eternity in our new home. Verse 3, "And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back, just like the bridegroom will return." She doesn't know when, but he will return. She lives expectantly. Jesus says, "I will come back and take you to be with me, that you may also be where I am." Jesus is not referring to the resurrection here, which would happen in a few short days. He is referring to something known as the rapture. When the Father says it is time, the Son returns and gathers his bride to himself and takes us to be with him for eternity. I will come back and gather you up. There will be the big reveal one day. And in verse 4, he says, "You know the way to the place where I am going." And Thomas said to him immediately, "Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way?" In other words, Jesus, you have not given us a map. I have no idea what you're talking about right now. Because Thomas has this thought in his head that, well, you got to tell us the way. You got to get out the atlas. You got to get out the maps, the Jerusalem maps, and tell me where you're going so we can go there too. But what Thomas doesn't realize is that heaven is not a mappable place. You cannot put the coordinates in the GPS and get in a rocket and head to heaven and arrive there. Although there are some who will try to give you a false map or route to heaven. For instance, good works is a false map or route or way to heaven. Worldly wisdom is a false map to heaven. Riches and prosperity are a false map to heaven. Be careful what route or way you follow. You might find where you thought there was a road, there was actually no road at all. It reminds me of this short clip from The Office.
Make the next right turn.
How do they know? How does this know where to turn? That's very impressive.
Make a right turn.
Wait. No. It means bear right.
No,
up there.
It said right. It said take a right.
No, look. It means go up to the right, bear right, over the bridge, and hook up with 307.
Make a right
Maybe it's
turn.
a shortcut, Dwight. It said go to the right.
It can't mean that. There's a lake
I think
there.
it knows where it is going.
This is the
the
lake.
machine
This
knows.
is the lake.
Stop yelling at me.
No, it's
Stop
not
yelling.
There's no road here. Remain calm. I have trained for this. Okay. Exit the window. Here we go.
Make a U-turn, if possible.
I love how it dings back in. Make a U-turn, if possible. Be careful what route you follow. Be careful what voices lead you. Because you may find where you thought there was a road, there is no road at all. And you will find your life in need of a U-turn, if possible. Well, if those are false routes and actually leading to no route at all, what is the route to heaven? What is the way to where Jesus is going, the place he prepares? And that leads us to verse 6. Before I read this, there was a note in my Bible that my wife Michelle had written in pencil. I knew it wasn't my handwriting because you could read it. And it said, "This is the verse from which I became a Christian at age 28. From reading this one verse. Because how could he say this if it wasn't true? It's all summed up here. Verse 6, Jesus answered, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me, which leads us that this is one of the 7 I am statements in the Gospel of John. Neil has taken us through the Gospel of John. We are now in the middle of the I am statements. This is the 6th one that I have been given here to talk about and discuss. But I think it might be a little different than some of the other I am statements. The ones before it were made, from what I can tell, outside, more public, more declarative. I am. In many ways, because it's based on when Moses said, who should I tell, the Egyptians who sent me? Who should I say that you are? And he says, say, I am sent you. I am, God's name. So Jesus is identifying with the name of God here. It's a powerful statement. But this time it is said, and Diane read it so beautifully and tenderly, in a smaller setting, at a dinner. And the disciples, if you've seen pictures of the Last Supper, they would kind of recline next to each other, recline at the table. I mean, Thomas and Philip, who's about to ask him, they're about that far apart. I don't see Jesus going, I am. It's a tender, hey, Thomas, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. It's a different setting. It's a different tone than the other ones. Why? Because the disciples were about to be sent out. And perhaps the way they heard it is the way they would go out and communicate it. Because the way, the truth, and the life had just gotten down on his knees and washed their feet and served them and said it after an act of humble service. So as they were sent out, perhaps they were more inclined to communicate it in that way. There was no podium, there was no press, there was no bullhorn, there was no demonstration. A simple, intimate statement after an act of service. It doesn't take a rainbow wig and a John 3:16 poster to share the good news of Jesus. It doesn't take yelling or a bullhorn or a seminary degree. It doesn't take protest signs or marches, and it doesn't take the form of a certain political sign. It takes humility, service. The way, the truth, and the life was clothed that day in compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, as he said he is the way, the only way. And that is how we should clothe ourselves as we have these conversations about Jesus. Compassion, kindness, humility, patience, service. And it might be amazing how many more people might listen if we communicate it the way Jesus did that day. Well, how can that happen? How can the way be clothed in kindness and compassion? How can the truth be clothed in humility and patience? Well, it's point 2. The way and the truth and the life are all a person. Not a methodology, not a system of beliefs. It is a person that is the way, that is the truth, that is the life. The way is a person, not a resume. In other words, all these things, my friends, disciples who are around me, have been before you this whole time. When Pilate looks at him and says, what is truth? Ironically, truth is standing in front of Pilate as a person, and he can't see it because he's looking for something else, not a person. It's like the Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy, after the 2.5-hour movie, finds out what she'd been looking for was with her all along. Would have been a much shorter movie if she'd known that. But she had it all. She didn't have to go on this journey in the great and powerful Oz and all these explosions and lights and loud booming voice. She had it all along, the way to go home. And Jesus is telling his friends, you've had it all along, the way to get where I am going. He could have scored more political points and political correctness if he said, I know the way, or I'll show the way. But he speaks not of what he does, but who he is. I am the way. Never forget Jesus the way washed feet. Jesus the truth gathered children in his arms, and then he ate supper with sinners. Jesus the life went to the cross to prepare the way that we may also be raised in new life with him. Verse 4 continues. It says, you know the way. He told you, I've been here all along. You know the way. But they thought the way was political power. They thought the way was overthrowing the Roman government, might. Jesus didn't say he would show us a way. He said he is the way. He didn't say he would teach us the truth. He said he is the truth. He didn't say he'd offer us advice on life. He said he is the life. In verse 7, if you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. The most used word in the Gospel of John is the word believe. Think of the Ted Lasso sign, believe, up in the locker room. But the second most used word is know, K-N-O-W, know. It's used 6 times in this passage, and it is 131 times used in the book of John. You know the way. How can we know the way? If you really know me, you will know my Father. How do you know him? People smarter than me and on a higher pay scale or pay grade than me will tell you that the word know there, K-N-O-W, is used 4 different ways in the book of John. There's 4 different levels of knowing. And the first couple times Thomas and Philip are using the word know, it is more to perceive, to see, to acknowledge. I know there's a chair over there. I know those are the exit doors. I know it. But as Jesus begins to use the word know in the later verses, it is the word to know that means more that there is a relationship between the knower and what is known. It is a relationship and not just an acknowledgement of facts. If you really know me, you will know my Father. You do know him and have seen him. So you want to get in? You want to go where Jesus is going? You want to know the route and the map? The way is a person, Jesus, and you've got to know him. Relationship, not just knowing of facts, which brings us to the last point. There is a difference between knowing all about someone and actually knowing them, having a relationship with them. And there are benefits too. Let me just give you an example. Growing up, I was very into music. You would find me in high school with my Panasonic stereo with a cassette deck and record player with this curly headphone jack thing with my realistic Radio Shack headphones on with the separate volume controls. There's a lot of my high school. Loved a lot of bands, but my favorite band was a band known as the Eagles. Take It Easy, Hotel California, The Long Run, Peaceful Easy Feeling, Life in the Fast Lane. They filled the radio of the 70s and 80s. I knew everything there was to know about the Eagles. I knew they formed at a bar called the Troubadour in Los Angeles. I knew they were doing a gig for Linda Ronstadt. They were her backup band at a gig in Disneyland, and they decided to form their own band. I knew, for instance, that the Eagles have the greatest selling album of all time. It's not Michael Jackson Thriller. It's the Eagles' greatest hits, 71 to 75, is the greatest selling album of all time in the U.S. Hotel California is number 3. And those records will never be broken because no one buys albums anymore. And if I had to pick my rock and roll hero out of that, it would have been a guy named Don Henley. Don sang Desperado, Life in the Fast Lane, Hotel California, Best of My Love. He wrote all those songs with Glenn Frey. He went on to a great solo career, Boys of Summer, End of the Innocents. I remember buying my End of the Innocents cassette tape at Sound Warehouse at the corner of Beltline and Preston. I probably saw some of you there. And I put it in my Nissan 200 SX, and I drove to Colorado to work at Young Life Camp, and I memorized every word. I knew everything about Don Henley. His mom was a school teacher. His dad sold auto parts. His first band was named Shiloh. I knew it all. But then I get a note in my box a few years later at a place called Windy Gap, another Young Life Camp, and says, Brian, your sister is going out on a blind date with Don Henley. And I think, I should go out on a blind date with Don Henley. She doesn't know anything about him. Next thing I know, my sister is dating Don Henley. Next thing I know, Don leans over to me at dinner and says, we want you to be a groomsman in our wedding. Next thing you know, I'm a groomsman in Malibu, California, in Don Henley's wedding. Yes, my sister was there, but it was Don Henley's wedding. The LA Times called the reception alone the rock concert of the decade. Bruce Springsteen sang, Sting sang, Billy Joel sang, Sheryl Crow sang, John Fogerty, Jackson Brown. Tony Bennett did a 30-minute set just to honor my parents. And I'm sitting at my table, and there's Jackson Brown and his table, and there's Jimmy Buffett and his table, and Courtney Cox and her table, and Ben Stiller and his table. It was crazy. At the end of the night, I'm out on the dance floor at 2 in the morning dancing with one of the bridesmaids. This is before I was married. And you're dancing in a little circle, kind of like with your friends. And we're the only ones on the dance floor, except these were not my friends. My circle was Bruce Springsteen and his wife, Bob Seger and his wife, and Bruce Hornsby and his wife. And we're all just dancing away. And it's like I'd won some kind of rock and roll fantasy prom essay contest. Little Brian Summerall writes in from Dallas, Texas, and says, it was crazy, but all my head knowledge of Don Henley and all my Don Henley trivia would not get me in the room that day. There was plenty of security, and I could quote all my Don Henley trivia. Oh my gosh, Don Henley, first band Shiloh, 5 Grammys for End of the Innocents. Your dad sold auto parts. He doesn't know you. You're not getting in. I could run into Don Henley on the street and go, oh my gosh, Don Henley, your first band named Shiloh, you went to the University of North Texas, then you went to Texas State. After that, you were an English major. You met Glenn Frey, the troubadour, and he'd look at me and go, do I know you? And I go, oh no, but I know everything about you. And as restraining orders were being filed and the police were dragging me away, I would realize there is a big difference between knowing about someone and actually knowing them and having a relationship with them. And there are benefits too. When we would go to an Eagles concert, Michelle and I wouldn't get online and hope it wouldn't sell out or announce a second show. We would go with the band, and it's really cool. You get a police escort. Then you pull under the venue. And at the new Mile High Stadium at the American Airlines Center, Don's always got a big room of hospitality with great Tex-Mex and barbecue. And I go down the line and I fill up my plate. And if anybody says, what are you doing? I point over to Don and I say, I'm with him. And they say, take anything you want. And I do. My pockets are lined with Ziploc bags and foil because I'm on staff with Young Life at the time. I'm taking leftovers. And when Don's behind the drum kit singing Desperado for the final encore, we're not worried about traffic. We're sitting backstage like I was at the opening of the new Mile High Stadium in Denver, and I can lean out behind the horn section and wave to 60,000 people. If anybody says, what are you doing? I point to Don and I say, I'm with him. And they say, do anything you want. And I do. Not because of who I am, though, but because of who he is. And everything that is rightfully his, that he has earned, is bestowed upon me because of my relationship with him, the relationship between what is known and the knower. Hey, friends, one day, God is throwing a party in heaven he calls the Great Banquet Feast. And your ticket in, first of all, it'll make my sister's wedding reception look like a bad roller rink birthday party by comparison. But your ticket in is not what you know. It's who you know and have a relationship with. Will you really stand before a holy and perfect God one day and he says, why should I let you in my heaven? And you're going to start quoting your Jesus trivia? I think there's something about feeding 5,000, and here's my community group attendance card, and here's my tithe record, here's my list of good works. God will say, I never knew you. Or will you say, when God says, why should I let you in? Will you say, you know what, God, you shouldn't? Because I have fallen short of your glory. I have missed the mark. That's what sin means. We have fallen short of God's perfection. And then you point over to Jesus and go, but God, I'm with him. And everything that is rightfully his, that he earned, heaven, is bestowed upon me because of my relationship with him. He is my way, Lord. He is the truth. And he is my life. I am covered in Jesus at that moment, dressed in his righteousness alone, faultless to stand before the throne. And God will say, well done. Hey friends, what are you going to point to in the end? A list of do's and don'ts, some directions, rules, wisdom of the world, a life of pleasure, riches, fame, achievement, your small group attendance, the size of your tithing? Or will you point to Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life, and say, I'm with him? Because no one comes to the Father except through him. Let me pray, and then we'll move to communion. Dear God, I thank you that at this tender moment, you leaned into your friends and let them know that you are the way, not a way, but the way. Father, I pray we would put down our resumes and our list of good works, or whatever we think is going to get us to you, and we would simply point to you and say, I'm with you, Jesus. Because that's when everything changes. I pray for anyone wandering about that just doesn't know where they're going. I pray they would know definitively today that Jesus, you are the way. I pray for anyone confused who doesn't know what to think, that they would know, Lord Jesus, that you are the truth. And I pray for anyone here today feeling dead inside and who does not know if they can even go on. Lord, I pray they would know that you are life and they would run to you. I pray these things in Christ's name. Amen. We're going to move to a time of communion now, and our volunteers are going to come forward with the trays. And as they come forward and as the tray is passed, realize you will take 2 cups. They are stacked, the 2 cups. One holds the bread and one holds the juice. You'll take the 2, and then we'll come back up here in a minute.